She came to the grand ball alone, holding her breath as whispers followed her across the room. Then her ex-husband saw her, and the woman beside him smiled. "You're brave to come here by yourself," the mistress said softly. The wife swallowed hard, forcing a calm smile even as old pain rose in her chest. But before she could turn away, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Why is my wife standing alone?" In that one moment the room changed, and so did everything. Beautiful people, welcome back. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe and leave a like. It means everything to us. Please share this video with someone you care about and switch on post notifications so you won't miss any future videos. Also, comment where you're watching from. Thank you for always supporting. Now, relax and let's begin. Maria and Lester were the kind of couple people admired without asking questions. At dinners they arrived smiling, dressed beautifully, moving with the ease of people who knew how to belong in polished rooms. Lester always held her chair. Maria always smiled warmly at his colleagues. They looked settled, graceful, almost perfect. More than once people told Maria, "You're lucky, he adores you." She would smile and say, "We're doing our best." But inside their elegant home, something quieter lived. Lester had started coming home late, loosening his tie without really seeing her, answering her questions with half-hearted words and tired nods. Maria noticed the change long before she admitted it to herself. She would set the table for two, straighten the flowers, and listen for his footsteps with the hopeful patience of a woman trying not to panic. When he finally came in, she would ask, "Long day?" And he would answer, "Very," before reaching for his phone again. It was never one cruel moment. That was what made it harder to explain. It was the slow disappearance of warmth. Even their laughter had become memory. Still, Maria told herself marriage had seasons. "Don't be dramatic," she whispered to her reflection one evening. "He's just tired." Then she turned off the bedroom lamp and pretended not to feel alone. Lucy had once felt like a gift in Maria's life. She was elegant, attentive, and soft-spoken, the kind of friend who knew how to sit close and listen as though nothing else in the world mattered. She came by with pastries, remembered birthdays, and noticed small changes in Maria's face before anyone else did. "You've been carrying too much," Lucy said one afternoon, taking Maria's hand across the coffee table. The concern felt real. Maria believed it was real. When Lester became harder to speak to, Lucy became easier. She listened without interrupting, nodded at the right moments, and made Maria feel less foolish for worrying about things she could barely name. But Lucy had also begun fitting herself too naturally into Lester's presence. She laughed at his dry comments before Maria even understood them. She knew which drink he preferred and how he liked his meetings organized. At first, Maria thought nothing of it. Friends became familiar around each other. That was normal. Still, there were tiny things she could not explain. The way Lucy sometimes answered a question Maria had asked Lester. The way Lester relaxed around Lucy in ways he no longer did around his wife. "You two are becoming old friends," Maria said lightly one evening. Lucy smiled. "Only because I care about both of you." Lester said nothing, but his silence lingered. The change in Lester did not happen loudly. It happened in patterns. He began answering messages later than before. He missed meals, forgot details Maria once never had to repeat, and treated long conversations like tasks waiting to end. Even when he was seated across from her, something in him felt elsewhere. Their evenings, once filled with small conversations about work, family, or dreams, became quiet stretches broken only by cutlery and phone notifications. Maria tried not to react too quickly. She did not want to become the kind of wife who turned every silence into fear. So she carried her questions alone, hoping the distance would pass if she stayed gentle enough. Lucy noticed Maria's sadness before Maria fully admitted it aloud. "Men pull away when life feels heavy," she said over tea one afternoon. "Sometimes the best thing is to give them room to breathe." Maria stared into her cup. "What if the room becomes too much?" she asked quietly. Lucy gave a sympathetic smile. "Then at least he won't say you crowded him." It sounded wise. It sounded mature. Maria held on to the advice because she wanted peace more than answers. That night when Lester came home late again, she only said, "Your food is in the oven." He nodded without looking up. Maria turned away before he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. Lucy became even more careful after that. With Maria, she spoke gently about Lester's stress, reminding her that successful men often carried hidden pressures. "He's not cold," she said. "He's overwhelmed." With Lester, her tone was different. She would sigh softly and say, "Maria means well, but she feels everything so deeply. I worry she doesn't realize how much pressure you're under." Lucy never said enough to sound cruel. She only said enough to widen the space between them. That was her gift. She knew how to shape herself into concern while quietly moving like division. And because she always sounded reasonable, neither of them saw the full damage immediately. One evening, Lester came home to find Maria waiting in the sitting room. She had spent hours deciding whether to speak. "Have I done something to upset you?" she asked carefully. Lester exhaled sharply. "Maria, must everything become emotional?" The words were not loud, but they landed heavily. She blinked. "I'm only asking because you feel far away." He loosened his cuff and said, "I'm tired. I come home and feel examined." Later that week, Lucy sat beside Maria and murmured, "You see, he needs peace, not questions." Maria nodded slowly, never realizing the same mouth had fed Lester the feeling that home itself had become a burden he needed escape from. The deepest sorrow in Maria's marriage was one she spoke about only in careful pieces. She and Lester had been trying for a child for years, and every passing month seemed to press more quiet grief into the walls of their home. Family members stopped asking directly, but their silences said enough. Friends announced pregnancies with apologetic smiles. Older women offered remedies Maria had never requested. She carried the ache with composure in public and tears in private. Sometimes she would fold tiny baby clothes in shops, then put them back before anyone noticed. She told herself hope was still possible, but hope had become exhausting work she performed mostly alone. Lester used to comfort her during those early disappointments. He would hold her hand after appointments and say, "We'll be fine." But gradually, even that tenderness faded. He stopped asking how she felt. He stopped sitting beside her on difficult evenings. Once, after a long hospital visit, Maria whispered, "I just need you near me tonight." Lester, distracted and distant, answered, "I can't carry this conversation again." The room seemed to freeze around her. Lucy knew about all of it. Maria had cried on her shoulder more than once, saying, "Maybe I'm the problem." Lucy had stroked her arm and replied, "Don't say that." Yet somewhere beneath her sympathy, she was already learning where Maria was weakest. It started with moments too small to accuse but too sharp to forget. Lucy and Lester shared a joke that ended the instant Maria entered the room. A glance passed between them during dinner, brief but strangely intimate. One afternoon, Maria called Lester and heard Lucy's voice in the background, laughing softly before the line suddenly went quiet. "Are you with Lucy?" she asked. Lester paused a beat too long. "She was just dropping something off." Maria said nothing after that, but unease began settling into her spirit like cold water. She wanted evidence before fear. She wanted reason before pain. Yet her heart had already started trembling. Unable to carry it alone, Maria finally brought it to Lucy as gently as she could. "Please don't misunderstand me," she said, twisting her fingers together, "but lately, some things have felt uncomfortable." Lucy's face changed at once, not into guilt but wounded dignity. "Maria," she said softly, "are you truly suggesting something improper?" Maria rushed to explain. "No, not exactly, Lucy withdrew her hand. "I have stood by you through so much. If this is how little you trust me, maybe I've overstepped by caring at all." By the end of the conversation, Maria was apologizing through embarrassment, while Lucy embraced her and said, "You're hurting. I understand." Maria left feeling ashamed, and somehow even more alone. After that, Lester changed more quickly. He began coming home later than ever, and when he did arrive, he brought a different energy with him: restlessness, impatience, irritation. Maria tried to meet him with softness. She warmed his food, lowered her voice, and chose her words with care, as though one wrong tone might push him farther away. "Can we sit together for a little while?" she asked one night. Lester dropped his keys on the console and rubbed his forehead. "Maria, I'm exhausted." She rose from the dining table anyway. "I miss you," she admitted. He looked at her, but not with the tenderness she hoped for. "You make everything heavy lately." Those words stayed with her long after the room fell quiet. She stopped asking for much after that, but silence did not bring him back. It only made the house colder. Lester started taking calls on the balcony, speaking in low voices, turning away when she passed. Maria would lie awake listening for the sound of his footsteps entering their room, and sometimes hear him pause outside as if deciding whether to come in at all. The pain of loving someone emotionally absent was unlike any pain she had known. It gave her nothing clear to hold, nothing loud to point at, only a daily emptiness she kept trying to fill with patience while her heart slowly wore thin. Lisa had always been the kind of mother who noticed what others missed. She saw the tiredness under Maria's eyes before Maria sat down. She saw how her daughter smiled with only her mouth, not her whole face. Over lunch in her small, neat dining room, Lisa asked gently, "My child, are you resting at all?" Maria gave a quick smile. "I'm fine, Mama, just work and life." Lisa reached for her hand. "You used to speak with light in your eyes. Now you speak like someone carrying something alone." Maria lowered her gaze. She wanted to tell the truth, but saying it aloud would make it harder to deny, so she protected everyone except herself. "Lester has just been busy," she said, "and Lucy has been trying to help." Lisa was quiet for a moment, then asked, "And who is helping you?" The question nearly broke her. Maria forced a laugh and stood to clear the plates too early. Lisa followed her into the kitchen and said softly, "You do not have to explain anything before you are ready. Just don't disappear inside your pain." Maria nodded, unable to speak. That evening, while driving home, she realized how desperately she needed someone to see her without requiring proof. Lisa had done that in one afternoon. It was not a solution, but it was the first place her sorrow felt safe. Lucy no longer seemed content staying at the edges of Maria's life. She had started entering spaces that once belonged naturally to a wife. She knew Lester's schedule, his preferred routes, even which tie he wore for important meetings. One Saturday morning, Maria came downstairs to find Lucy in the kitchen, laughing softly while handing Lester a cup of coffee. The scene was so domestic, so casually intimate that Maria stopped on the staircase without meaning to. Lucy turned with a bright smile. "You're awake. I brought pastries." Lester barely looked up. Lucy was nearby. The explanation came too quickly, as if prepared in advance. Later that day, Maria asked Lester, "Why does she seem to know so much about your movements now?" Lester's expression hardened immediately. "Must I account for every person I speak to?" Maria swallowed. "That's not what I mean." He stepped closer, not loudly angry but coldly defensive. "Lucy has been kinder to this house than anyone lately, maybe because she doesn't turn everything into suspicion." When Maria turned to Lucy afterward, Lucy looked wounded again. "I'm starting to feel unwelcome for simply caring," she murmured. Maria stood there, heart racing, doubting herself even as every instinct told her something sacred was slipping from her hands. The betrayal was no longer distant. It was beginning to breathe in her own home. The truth did not come to Maria gently. It came on an evening heavy with rain, when Lester said he would be late and Lucy had not answered her calls all day. Something restless moved in Maria's chest, and for the first time she stopped trying to silence it. She drove to a hotel where Lester often held business meetings, telling herself she was being foolish. But when she entered the quiet lobby and saw them together near the private elevator, Lucy smiling up at Lester, his hand settled at the small of her back, the world inside her seemed to stop. There was no room left for excuses, no misunderstanding, no kind interpretation to hide inside. Neither of them noticed her immediately. Maria stood frozen, watching the two people she had loved most behave like a secret they believed deserved protection. When Lucy finally turned and saw her, the color left her face. Lester stepped back too late. "Maria," he began, but the sound of her name in his mouth only deepened the pain. She shook her head slowly. "How long?" she asked, though the question felt too small for what was breaking. Lucy's lips parted, but no words came. Lester looked away first. In that moment, Maria understood something worse than the affair itself. This had not begun tonight. It had been growing quietly while she was still begging life to spare her marriage. Maria returned home that night with the strange calm of someone whose heartbreak had become too large for immediate tears. Lester arrived much later, not panicked, not broken, only tense and impatient, as though exposure had interrupted a plan rather than ended a sacred trust. Maria sat in the sitting room waiting, hands folded in her lap. "Tell me I'm mistaken," she said when he entered. Lester stood still for a moment, then sighed. "Maria, this has been difficult for a long time." She stared at him. "That is not an answer." He rubbed his temple and said, "I didn't want this to happen like this." The sentence sounded more inconvenient than remorseful. Lucy came the next day, not as the apologetic friend Maria imagined, but as someone strangely steadied by the collapse of pretense. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said in a soft voice that no longer carried comfort. Maria looked at her, almost unable to connect this woman to the friend who had held her while she cried. "But you did," she replied. "You listened to my pain while making it deeper." Lucy's eyes lowered, yet even then there was no true surrender in her face. Maria understood then that this was not a mistake wrapped in regret. It was a decision, a patient one, and somehow that realization humiliated her more deeply than any public scene could have done. After the truth came out, the marriage did not end in one dramatic night. It faded in painful, deliberate steps. Lester stopped pretending there was anything left to protect. He spent less time at home, answered legal questions with clipped politeness, and moved through the house like a man already visiting his past. Maria kept hopping for one honest conversation, one moment where he might look at her and admit he understood what he had done. Instead, he became colder. "I didn't plan for things to become this complicated," he said one afternoon while sorting papers. Maria stood by the window and replied, "You make betrayal sound like scheduling trouble." Still, she asked because the heart asks even when dignity wants silence. "Did our years together mean so little?" Lester did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired, almost detached. "We stopped being happy a long time ago." Maria closed her eyes. "Then why let me keep fighting alone?" He looked away. "That hurt more than shouting ever could." There is a particular sorrow in realizing someone has already emotionally left while you are still trying to save the life you built together. By the time their formal separation began, Maria no longer felt like a wife standing at the edge of loss. She felt like a woman who had been mourning inside her marriage long before it died. Maria left the house with fewer things than anyone expected. A few suitcases, a framed photograph of her late father, some books, and the quiet dignity of a woman too exhausted to make a spectacle of her own pain. She did not argue over furniture or raise her voice in hallways meant for neighbors to overhear. Lester watched from the doorway, looking unsettled but not repentant. "You don't have to do this today," he said, almost mechanically. Maria gave him a tired look. "I should have done it the day I realized I was the only one still inside this marriage." Then she picked up her handbag and stepped into the waiting car. Lisa received her daughter without questions first. She simply opened the door, gathered Maria into her arms, and held her long enough for the silence to do what language could not. When Maria finally broke down, it was not loud. It was the soft collapse of a woman who had spent too many months standing through pain. "I kept thinking if I loved carefully enough, things would return," she whispered. Lisa stroked her hair and answered, "Love should not require you to disappear." That evening, Maria sat on the edge of the guest bed in her childhood home and looked around at familiar walls. Everything was smaller than she remembered, yet safer. Her old life was over. She had not accepted it fully, but she had finally walked away. Starting over did not feel inspiring. It felt ordinary and difficult. Maria had to learn how to wake up without listening for another person in the bathroom, how to prepare breakfast for one, how to pass long afternoons without the structure of marriage shaping her hours. Even simple decisions became emotional work. She would reach for 2 mugs before remembering she only needed one. She would hear a car pull into the driveway and for half a second think Lester had come, only to remember there was nothing left to return to. Healing had not begun yet. Survival had. And survival, she discovered, could be made of very quiet forms of courage. Lisa never pushed too hard. She let Maria move through pain at her own pace, offering company without pressure. Some evenings they sat on the veranda shelling peas or folding laundry, talking about everything except the divorce until Maria was ready. On one such evening, Lisa said softly, "The world will rush you to be strong. Don't listen." Maria leaned back and closed her eyes. I don't feel strong. Lisa smiled sadly. You came out of something that was hurting you and you are still here. Sometimes that is strength. Maria said nothing, but the words settled somewhere deep. She was not transforming overnight. She was merely learning that breathing through grief was its own kind of work. What made the healing harder was how quickly Lester and Lucy stepped into public ease. Before the separation papers had even fully cooled into finality, they began appearing together openly. At a restaurant, at a gallery opening, at a business dinner where people smiled too carefully when Maria's name came up. Their comfort wounded her more than she expected. It suggested they had been preparing for this life long before she knew her own was ending. Friends called with half-sympathetic updates she never asked for. I thought you should hear it from someone kind, one woman said. Maria thanked her politely, then sat for an hour staring at nothing, feeling publicly replaced, so she withdrew. She stopped attending certain gatherings and declined invitations that felt too close to familiar circles. Even hearing Lucy's name tightened something painful inside her chest. One afternoon, Lisa found her folding and refolding the same scarf at the dining table. You can stop pretending this part doesn't hurt, she said. Maria looked up, eyes shining. It feels like they moved into happiness using pieces of my life. Lisa came closer and kissed her forehead. What they built from dishonesty will never be the peace you deserve. Maria wanted to believe that. But at that stage, all she really knew was that public humiliation had a second life. It did not end when the door behind her closed. Maria met Governor Wade in a setting so ordinary it almost felt undeserving of what it would later mean. She had accepted a temporary advisory role on a state community project after months of hesitation, largely because Lisa insisted she needed something outside her grief. During one planning session, the governor arrived with only a small team and no unnecessary display. He listened more than he spoke, asking measured questions and letting others finish their thoughts. When Maria presented her section, he did not interrupt or flatter. He simply paid attention. Afterward, as people gathered their files, he paused beside her and said, "You speak carefully. That is rarer than confidence." Comment unsettled her, not because it was romantic, but because it felt observant in a way she had not expected. "Thank you, sir," she answered, keeping her tone formal. Wade nodded once. "I meant it." Then he moved on to his next conversation without lingering. That was what stayed with her later. He had no hunger to impress her, no need to command the emotional space around him. He was composed, reserved, and unexpectedly gentle without trying to appear so. Driving home, Maria told herself the meeting meant nothing. Yet something in her had relaxed briefly while speaking to him. It was not attraction yet. It was simply the unfamiliar comfort of being heard without being handled. Maria encountered Wade again through the same project, then again at a follow-up meeting, and each time their conversations lengthened by only a little. He never pushed past what she offered. If she mentioned work, he stayed with work. If she paused, he let silence rest without rushing to fill it. One afternoon, while others reviewed documents nearby, he asked, "Have you always preferred thoughtful rooms to loud ones?" Maria almost laughed. "Is it that obvious?" Wade's mouth lifted faintly. "Only to people who also prefer them." It was a small exchange, but it carried a warmth that did not feel demanding, and for once Maria left a conversation without feeling emptied afterward. In time, he revealed small pieces of himself too, not in speeches but in careful human fragments. A late wife he still honored privately. Long years of public duty that left little room for honest companionship. Grief that had taught him discipline rather than bitterness. He did not tell these things to pull sympathy from her. He shared them the way some people place a candle in a dark room, not to overwhelm it, only to make it easier to breathe there. Maria found herself speaking more freely than she intended. Not all at once, just enough to let him see that she, too, had learned how to stand in public while carrying a private ache no one fully understood. Brent had known Wade long enough to notice the shifts others missed. He saw it in the way Wade lingered a little after meetings where Maria was present, and in the calmer tone that entered his voice when her name came up. It was not excitement, not the careless brightening of a man chasing distraction. It was quieter than that. Wade seemed more grounded, more human in the spaces after speaking with her. One evening, while reviewing schedules, Brent allowed himself a small smile and said, "You've become more patient with crowded rooms lately." Wade glanced up. "Have I?" Brent nodded. "Only since a certain advisor began attending your sessions." Wade did not answer immediately, but neither did he dismiss the observation. Elsewhere, Lisa was noticing her own version of change in Maria. Her daughter had started laughing unexpectedly at small things again. She took more care with her clothes. She spoke about her work without the same heaviness dragging at each sentence. One afternoon, Lisa looked at her closely and asked, "Who have you met?" Maria almost smiled despite herself. "Why do you think it's someone?" Lisa folded her arms. "Because pain taught you silence. Something is teaching you breath again." Maria turned away, embarrassed by how true it felt. Hope had not been named yet, but it had quietly entered the room. The change in Maria came so gradually that she noticed it only in hindsight. She began waking with less dread. She started taking long walks in the evening and no longer felt as though every public place was filled with judgment. She returned to little habits she had abandoned: fresh flowers on her desk, handwritten notes in the margins of books, music playing softly while she cooked. Nothing about her healing was dramatic. That was what made it real. Wade was not rescuing her from sorrow. He was simply creating a space around her where she did not have to defend her feelings, explain her scars, or shrink her thoughts to keep someone comfortable. One afternoon, after a long discussion about policy, Wade offered to walk her to her car. The parking area was nearly empty, washed in late golden light. "You look less burdened these days," he said gently. Maria let out a breath. "Maybe I'm learning not to carry everything like proof." Wade looked at her for a moment, then said, "That sounds like peace beginning." His words unsettled and soothed her at once. Peace had become such an unfamiliar feeling that she almost mistrusted it. Yet when she drove home, she caught herself smiling at nothing. It frightened her a little, not because she disliked the feeling, but because she had forgotten how hope could arrive quietly and still change everything. As Maria's connection with Wade deepened, fear rose beside it. The heart does not forget betrayal simply because something kinder appears. She found herself second-guessing every moment of comfort, every unexpected ease. How could she trust her own judgment when she had once trusted Lester and Lucy so completely? She feared not only being hurt again, but the shame of having been wrong twice. One evening, after Wade dropped her home from an event, he noticed her lingering hesitation by the gate. "You don't have to explain what you're afraid of," he said quietly, "but you should never feel rushed past it." The gentleness of that nearly brought tears to her eyes. Later, over tea with Lisa, Maria finally admitted what she had been carrying. "I think he is kind," she whispered. "That is what scares me. I thought that once before." Lisa reached for her hand and replied, "Kindness that asks nothing from your pain is different from kindness that studies it for advantage." Maria stared into her cup. "What if I still can't tell the difference?" Lisa squeezed her fingers. "Then let time tell it, not pressure, not loneliness. Time." Maria held those words close. She did not need grand declarations from Wade yet. His patience itself was becoming proof of something steadier than romance. It was becoming trust's first language. Lester first heard Maria's name linked to Governor Wade through casual conversation at a private dinner. One guest mentioned that Maria had been seen on several state assignments and spoke highly of her composure. Lester laughed lightly, as though the information meant little. "Maria always did know how to appear capable," he said, but the comment lingered. Later that night, while loosening his cufflinks, he mentioned it to Lucy. "Apparently your friend has become familiar with the governor's circle." Lucy's expression shifted almost invisibly. "Maria is careful," she said. "If she's still around him, it means he trusts her." Lester waved it off, but Lucy's silence afterward carried more concern than she wanted to show. For the first time, both of them sensed Maria was no longer standing where they had left her. That unsettled them in different ways. Lester was too proud to imagine she could truly move beyond the wreckage of their marriage without him. Lucy, however, had known Maria more intimately. She understood the strength hidden inside her softness, and did not underestimate what healing could do when given room. "Do you think there's something there?" Lester asked later, trying to sound amused. Lucy smoothed the fold of a napkin and replied, "I think we should stop assuming she is still broken." The sentence fell between them like a warning neither wanted to examine too closely. Wade had never treated Maria's past like a puzzle to solve, but as his feelings deepened, he knew enough to understand that her pain had shape and history. Brent, discreet as ever, quietly looked into the social currents surrounding her, not to gather gossip, but to protect Wade from walking blindly into something he should understand. The truth came back in measured fragments. Lester had not only left Maria, he had left with a woman who had once been her close friend. The betrayal had not been sudden. It had been layered, private, and deeply humiliating. When Brent finished speaking, Wade said nothing for several moments. His stillness was heavier than outrage. Later, when Maria cautiously told him more in her own words, he listened without interruption. She did not dramatize it. That made it harder to hear. "She knew what hurt me most," Maria said quietly, "and she used that knowledge while telling me she cared." Wade looked at her with calm sorrow, not pity. "That should never have happened to you," he said. There was no performance in the sentence, no fiery promise meant to impress, just truth. Maria lowered her eyes, unexpectedly moved. In that moment she understood something profound about him. He would never use her pain as a story to enjoy, a weakness to study, or a wound to step around. He would hold it carefully. Wade's love became visible in the quietest ways. He remembered details Maria herself forgot she had mentioned. He would send a book tied to a conversation they once had or ask after Lisa with sincere attentiveness. He never crowded her with attention, never vanished to test her, never treated her sadness like something inconvenient. When she grew silent, he did not demand brightness from her. He simply remained present. One evening, while they stood on a government residence balcony after a formal meeting, Maria said softly, "You make stillness feel safe." Wade turned to her and answered, "That may be the nicest thing anyone has ever told me." Peace frightened her more than chaos once had. She had spent so long bracing herself for disappointment that softness felt almost unreal. "I don't know what to do with something gentle," she admitted during a later walk through the garden path. Wade's expression did not change. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "You only have to let it remain gentle." Maria stopped walking for a moment. Those words found her somewhere tender and tired. She realized then that what she felt for him had already begun growing. Not with drama, not with hunger, with rest. And perhaps because it was so different from what had come before, that made it feel all the more sacred. Wade proposed on an evening so quiet it seemed designed for honesty. There were no cameras, no grand audience, no attempt to overwhelm the moment with status. He invited Maria to a private garden at the residence after dinner, where low lights glowed beneath flowering trees and the air felt still enough to hear one's own heart. He stood before her with the same steadiness he had always carried and said, "I have no wish to rush your healing, but I know what I feel, and I know the life I would be honored to build with you." Then he asked, simply and sincerely, if she would marry him. Maria's eyes filled at once, not because she lacked love for him, but because fear rose beside it. "You know what people will say," she whispered. "A divorced woman, a governor, they will turn it into something smaller than it is." Wade stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, only enough to be clear. "People have always reduced what they do not understand," he said. "If you live hiding from them, they will still speak. If you live truthfully, they will speak anyway. The difference is whether you lose your life trying to silence them." Maria looked at him through tears. For the first time, a proposal did not feel like pressure. It felt like being invited into dignity. Their wedding was private, gentle, and deeply emotional. Only a small trusted circle was present, Lisa with trembling gratitude in her eyes, Brent standing with respectful quiet, and two witnesses chosen because they understood the value of discretion. Maria wore a simple, elegant gown, and Wade looked at her not with triumph but with reverence. When they exchanged vows, the room held no noise beyond the officiant's voice and the softness of tears. Maria had never understood until that moment how healing it could feel to enter marriage without fear. No pretending, no bargaining for peace, no swallowing pain to keep a bond intact. Only calm, honesty, and chosen devotion. After the ceremony, Lisa held Maria's face in both hands and whispered, This time, you are not walking into a house that will ask you to shrink. Maria could only nod. Brent, watching Wade from a little distance, saw a peace in his friend that public office had never given him. Later, when the small gathering had thinned and evening settled around them, Wade took Maria's hand and said softly, "We will reveal this when the right moment comes." She searched his face. "And if the right moment hurts before it heals," Wade answered without hesitation, "then you will not stand in it alone." Those words became the quiet promise resting beneath their secret marriage. When the governor's ball approached, Maria felt unease long before she admitted it. The event would gather officials, business families, social figures, and too many faces from a world that had watched her humiliation in whispers. She sat at the edge of their room one evening holding the invitation card while Wade adjusted papers at his desk. "I know this is part of your life," she said, "but walking into that room feels like walking back into places I barely survived." Wade crossed to her and knelt slightly so his eyes met hers. "You are not walking back," he said. "You are walking in as someone entirely different now." Even so, the anxiety remained. The morning of the event, an urgent security matter delayed Wade's arrival and forced a change in their plan. He touched Maria's hand before leaving and said, "Go ahead without me. Brent will make sure you are received properly. I will join you shortly." Maria tried to smile. "I dislike the sound of shortly." Wade's expression softened. "Then let me make a promise instead. No delay changes who you are to me." Brent offered quiet reassurance as well. But when Maria finally stepped into the car alone, her heartbeat was unsteady. She knew she was loved. She knew she was protected. Yet some old wounds still knew how to awaken old pain before healing could answer it. The governor's ball shimmered with polished, light, expensive fabric, and the familiar elegance of people trained to smile while watching everything. Maria entered alone, graceful in a refined gown that carried no need to impress, yet she felt every glance before anyone spoke. Brent escorted her to the main hall, then stepped away briefly to answer a call related to Wade's arrival. For one suspended moment, Maria stood by herself beneath chandeliers and practiced music, feeling both composed and strangely exposed. She lifted her chin and reminded herself of the truth. She was not who she used to be. But memory has its own timing, and some wounds stir simply from being seen in old spaces. Then Lester noticed her. Maria felt it before she turned. He stood across the room with Lucy at his side, both dressed in easy confidence, both carrying the quiet arrogance of people who believed they understood her story. Lucy's brows rose first, then her mouth curved into a smile too delicate to be kind. Lester leaned toward her and said something Maria could not hear, but Lucy laughed softly in response. They began walking toward her. The slow cruelty of that approach hurt almost as much as words might. Maria steadied her breath. She had survived much harder things than this. Still, as they drew near, she felt the old ache waking inside her. Lucy reached Maria first, her perfume and polished smile arriving together. "Maria," she said, glancing around with theatrical softness, "I didn't expect to see you here alone." Lester joined her with a half-smile that once would have made strangers think him charming. "It's a bold event for someone without an escort," he added. Maria met his gaze and said nothing. That seemed to encourage them. Lucy tilted her head, letting concern pretend to cover cruelty. "I hope you weren't uncomfortable entering by yourself. Rooms like this can be unforgiving." The sentence carried years inside it. Not just a ballroom, a marriage, a betrayal. A home she had once been made to feel unwelcome in. Maria's silence was not weakness, though her heart was trembling. It was restraint born of surviving too much to waste herself now. Lester looked around as though amused by the scene. "You should have told us if you needed company," he said lightly. Lucy gave a quiet laugh. "Or perhaps she still enjoys appearing where she might not quite belong." That one landed. Maria felt it in the old place Lucy alone knew how to touch. For a second her throat tightened, but she refused to let them see her break. She lifted her chin and answered only, "You both say more about yourselves than about me." Then footsteps sounded behind them, steady and unmistakable. The room changed before Wade even spoke. Conversation softened. Heads turned. A path seemed to open almost naturally as he entered with quiet authority. Brent a step behind him. But Wade did not pause for dignitaries or greetings. He saw Maria, saw Lester and Lucy near her, and crossed the ballroom directly. There was no uncertainty in him, no calculation. When he reached her, his expression gentled at once. Taking her hand, he said clearly enough for the surrounding silence to hear, "Forgive my lateness, my wife." The words seemed to strike the room in waves. Maria's breath caught. Lester went still. Lucy's face lost its practiced ease in an instant. Wade lifted Maria's hand to his lips with calm tenderness, then looked at her as if the rest of the room had ceased to matter. "You should not have had to wait alone," he said softly. That tenderness did what status alone never could. It restored honor in the exact place where humiliation had just tried to rise again. Around them, murmurs spread quickly: surprise, disbelief, sudden understanding. Lester stared as if language had abandoned him. Lucy's composure faltered completely. Maria looked up at Wade, emotion burning behind her eyes, and managed a faint whisper. "You came." Wade's hand tightened gently around hers. "I told you," he replied, "you would not stand in this alone." And for the first time, everyone believed it. Through the hall, Lucy attempted to recover herself. With polished grace rebuilt just enough to function, she approached Maria and Wade during a quieter moment near the terrace doors. "Congratulations," she said, the word careful and thin. "What a surprise this evening has been." Maria did not answer immediately. She no longer needed to rush into discomfort to keep anyone else at ease. Before Lucy could continue, Wade turned toward her with the calm firmness of a man who did not need to raise his voice to protect what mattered. "My wife owes no performance of comfort," he said, "to anyone who failed her in private and disrespected her in public." Silence after that was deeper than any argument could have been. Lucy stepped back first, her smile falling away at last. Lester, standing a short distance off, looked as though he had only just understood the full shape of his loss. But the night no longer belonged to them. It belonged to a woman who had once been made to carry shame alone and now stood honored without having to fight for it. As the evening ended, Maria left the ballroom on Wade's arm, tears resting in her eyes but peace settling in her heart. Lisa watched from nearby, overcome with gratitude. Brent said nothing. He only smiled faintly, knowing dignity had finally answered pain. We've come to the end of the story. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like, share, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification. Thank you so much for watching.